Former Attorney General Eric Holder adding his voice to the calls for incivility against Republicans. This just a day after Hillary Clinton admitted that Democrats cannot be civil to the GOP unless the Democrats have some control.
So is this the new normal for the left? The Hill contributor, Kristin Tate, is author of How Do I Tax Thee? And she joins us now to weigh in. Thanks for being here, Kristin. Now, look, I think some people would argue, well, they don't say these things literally. But then the other half argues, yeah, but people hear it literally because you're seeing it all over the streets, it seems like.
Yeah, no, this kind of violence-inciting rhetoric and seething hatred is the new norm on the left. And Eric Holder's comments, they're not an outlier. They're just a symptom of a much wider illness of liberal intolerance. There's a growing pattern of intimidation and mob scenes aimed at Republican officials. We're at the point now where people like Ted Cruz and Sarah Sanders can't even go to a restaurant and eat peacefully without being shouted down by angry mobs. You have officials and their families receiving death threats and beheading videos. And by the way, it's not just Republican politicians who are on the receiving end of this deplorable behavior. It's everyday Americans as well. My brother's car was vandalized a couple weeks ago because of his Trump bumper sticker. So amid this sort of explosion of left-wing intolerance, we have leaders like Eric Holder, Hillary Clinton, and Maxine Waters calling for more intolerant behavior. There is a culture of permissive violence exploding on the left, and bit by bit, this kind of behavior becomes normalized and escalates. And unfortunately, the natural extension of this kind of rhetoric is real violence. And we've already seen that happen. Rand Paul got attacked in his own yard. And of course, Steve Scalise was shot last year. So it's pretty terrifying.
Democrats point out that the president has made violent comments at his campaign rallies more than once. What do they say to that? What do the Republicans have to say about that?
Well, I think the media plays into this a lot, right? The media has this habit of trying to portray Trump's comments and distorting them in ways to make them seem as insensitive as possible. So this kind of coverage really only sort of fans the flames and makes the discord in this country even worse. So I think what we need to see are responsible leaders on both sides of the aisle coming out against mob-like behavior and violence of all kinds and saying enough is enough. We need to work together for a peaceful society that works for all Americans. Enough of this mob-like behavior that we're seeing.
Let's talk about Cory Gardner here for a second, because as we know, last week, at some point last week, I forget what day it was, but he came out saying that his wife had received a text message that included a video of a beheading. You just mentioned the beheading there. We want to read in part a tweet that he sent out because it is rather lengthy, but it says, quote, "This is not who we are. We have our political disagreements, and we should cherish the rights to express our disagreements. But when it comes to calls for violence and attempted murder and assassinations, this country has gone too far, and it's time we step back from that brink." Kristin, how do we step back from that? How do we make that happen? It just seems like we're at such a tough point in this country right now.
It's going to take some very brave Democratic leaders speaking out against this behavior that we're seeing. But right now, nobody's doing that. And all of this really underlines the fact that Barack Obama's calls for civility, Hillary Clinton's calls for unity, don't really seem like they were genuine. You know, the left uses these sound bites as a political tool to attack conservatives when it's politically convenient. But we all know that left-wing intolerance has been on the rise since the day of Trump's inauguration, when police indicted over 200 rioters. It's just gotten worse since then. The left has watched its base transform into a bunch of angry, violent fools who have no message. They block traffic, they vandalize buildings, and they harass conservatives. So we need to come together across party lines, say enough is enough. No violence on either side is acceptable.
Yeah, the stakes are very high right now. And Jeff Flake put it perfectly. He said, you know, this whole idea of winning at any cost is too high of a cost. You can't just say anything to try to win an election. Kristin Tate, thank you so much for your time. And we do have Cory Gardner on Fox and Friends at about 8:20 this morning.